Let's begin with AB 1518.
Right. AB 1518 will help those who we love, our parents and our grandparents, avoid the costly form of care so that their needs can be met in their homes and other community settings. The difference between seniors and disabled having a chance to thrive is just opposed to the surviving day to day would help with this bill. This will help wean our state off of default and the most expensive setting of long-term care in favor of less restrictive settings and community preservation of access to nursing homes. The most severe people, there are people who need nursing homes, but there are people who can live at home and have a better life. I've invited Deborah Doctor to represent the disability rights measure.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Deborah Doctor from Disability Rights California. We're the sponsor of the bill. And as Ms. Brown said at the beginning of introducing her other bill, there is an aging population. I'm part of it. I have my Medicare card now. And we can either pretend that nobody in that population will need care, or we can send them on their way to nursing homes and other institutions where they mostly don't want to go, and at the highest possible cost to the state, or we can offer alternatives that are what you will want and what everybody else wants and are generally less expensive to the taxpayers. And that's what this bill does. It gives alternatives. The last scorecard that was done by AARP and the SCAN Foundation estimated that there are over 10,000 people with low care needs in California nursing homes who could be cared for outside those institutions. And it's mostly at very little cost. Some of the people who come out cost us nothing, but we need to have choices. I have to say I'm very surprised at the cost estimates that we saw only this morning. I don't know what the basis is because we haven't been able to have a discussion about them with Department of Healthcare Services or anybody else. So we look forward to doing that and look forward to your support of a bill that would give people the choice of where to get their long-term care. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support.
Gary Passmore with Congress of California Seniors. We're absolutely in support of this legislation. Thanks.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support.
Karen Leggett, I wasn't going to talk, but I am a senior, and I may someday get there and need to go into long-term housing. My grandmother was in one. She was really abused in there. So we do need some regulations on that, but I'm saying us seniors do need a good place to go to.
Thank you. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
Department of Finance is opposed to this bill as it imposes significant additional costs on the state's general fund that are not included in the 2015 Budget Act. It's also unclear whether the bill is necessary as there is currently no waiting list for the nursing facility acute hospital waiver program. While the administration supports the goal of providing opportunities for individuals placed or at risk of placement in institutional care to return to the community, it's not clear to us that there's an unmet need that this bill would specifically address. We do have costs from the Department of Healthcare Services that would require approximately 45 additional nurses and $5.5 million, 1.1 million of which is general fund in 2016, and $5 million, 1.8 million of which is general fund annually to manage enrollment eligibility determinations and other administration of the program for the additional 5,000 beneficiaries required by the bill. We do believe that to the extent that some individuals in the waiver transition from or avoid placement in institutional care settings, the benefit costs would be mitigated by avoidance of the cost of institutional care.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, Ms. Brown, would you like to close?
I'm not quite sure of everything Department of Finance just said, because at the end, she said, I thought that it would be mitigated by them not being in the nursing home. So I don't know why we have a problem with this. This is to give seniors a choice. Do you want to go into a nursing home, or do you want to receive your care at home? The nursing home costs a heck of a lot more money than you staying in your own home and receiving care. And if it's your mother or your grandmother or your relative, you want them to be comfortable where they want to be. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Without objection, we'll move this item to the suspense file. You have one more item?
I'm going to waive that.
You're waiving presentation on that?
Yes, uh-huh.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown, for being here. We are waiving presentation. She's waiving presentation on AB 1526, members. We're going to take a quick second just to get ourselves organized with some last-minute waives. Okay, thank you. Moving right along through the agenda, we're going to commence with Mr. Holden's items. AB 15, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
We're neutral on this bill. At this time, there's no way to quantify the number of offenses that may be brought to action under the provisions of the bill. To the extent that there's a significant number of cases brought before the courts, there's the potential of additional unknown costs to them.
Thank you. Questions or comments from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. AB 252, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
We're opposed to this bill because it could create a Proposition 98 general fund cost pressure of $2.6 million to $5.2 million to the extent that federal funding or non-state funding sources are not available to fund the program. Additionally, school districts can use their LCFF allocations to establish or expand AP STEM programs. The LCFF consolidated most categorical programs into school district general purpose funding and provided schools with greater discretion to use their funding to meet local needs and priorities. Moreover, the LCFF includes a funding add-on for high school grades that can be used for career tech ed and or STEM courses, as well as other local needs.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 1162, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
We don't have a position on this bill. The Department of Healthcare Services indicates that expenditures for smoking deterrence in 2014 were $1 million in fee-for-service and $3.1 million in managed care Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal covers all FDA-approved prescription and over-the-counter tobacco cessation medications. However, utilization controls and preferred drug lists vary between fee-for-service and managed care, and between managed care plans. These processes often significantly reduce the cost of treatment because they allow plans to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies.
Thank you. Questions from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we'll move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 1293, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
We don't have a position on this bill. The fiscal impact is unknown, but we estimate that the administrative cost to implement the bill would be minor and absorbable to the impacted state agencies. Similarly, DGS estimates that the provisions of the legislation would not materially impact the workload associated with its review of personal service contracts. However, the state may incur additional costs to the extent that utilizing state civil service personnel to meet specific projects is less efficient than actually utilizing those personal service contracts.
Thank you. Without any comments or questions from committee, seeing none, without objection, we'll move this item to the suspense file. AB 1378, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
We're opposed to this bill because it'll increase the state's Prop 98 general fund costs by at least $175,000 in the first year of operation, and those costs are likely to grow every single year moving forward.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we'll move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Assembly Rodriguez's items. AB 22, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
We're opposed to this bill because it would result in substantial costs to send all firefighters and volunteer firefighters to specified training. The bill doesn't provide specifics on what types of reimbursements would be provided, which fire departments are eligible to provide, to apply for reimbursement, and if OES is required to reimburse costs associated with backfilling the firefighter's position during training. Assuming all firefighters and volunteer firefighters were eligible for the program, and assuming that they had to backfill costs, the total costs of this bill would exceed $377 million from the Regional Railroad Accident Preparedness and Immediate Response Fund, and that doesn't include actual tuition costs. In addition to established per diem rates for paid firefighters, the bill also allows an additional $100 per diem for each of the volunteer firefighters, which is a one-time reimbursement that would exceed $1 million. And finally, if OES is required to reimburse the cost with backfilling the firefighter's position, the financial impact would be prohibitive at a cost rate of $49.22 an hour, which is an average that we took for our estimate. The amount of training backfill would cost over $205 million.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 58. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
Department of Finance is opposed to this bill because it would create a state reimbursable mandate that could cost tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars, Prop 98 general fund, by requiring school districts and county offices of education to certify compliance with specified school safety requirements and to retain the plans and notifications that the bill requires. Schools are currently required to develop safety plans addressing a variety of issues that are broad enough to include procedures for responding to gun violence, but the specificity of this bill goes beyond that and creates the mandate.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 71. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
We're opposed to this bill because it has significant general fund cost implications, and it also creates a state reimbursable mandate, requiring each sheriff and police chief to annually report to DOJ all occurrences when a peace officer is involved in shootings in his or her jurisdiction, where an individual or a peace officer is injured or killed, and to report the number of cases that resulted in criminal prosecution. Could be significant workload, and those would all be eligible for general fund reimbursement.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we'll move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 172. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
As you know, we're very sensitive to increasing the local jail population and the local criminal justice system workload. And we're opposed to this measure because extending penalties for crimes punishable as misdemeanors could increase that statewide adult jail population and impact the ability of counties to manage their offender population. Additionally, it's not clear to us whether longer sentences for assaults and batteries on healthcare workers providing services within an emergency department of a hospital would reduce the number of incidents.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Senator Nielsen.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm glad to see finance being sensitive to this issue, but this is a minor bit of help. What we've done in Baby 109, just a massive dump, tens of thousands of unrehabilitated felons into our communities, much harder to put them back in. There's no supervision. There's almost no parole conditions. If we're going to address it, then we need to address the much bigger issue than this minor one.
Thank you. Comment, Senator Nielsen. Without objection, we'll move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Senator Chu, AB 35. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
The Franchise Tax Board estimates a general fund revenue loss of $44 million in 2015-16, $150 million in 2016-17, and $180 million in 17-18. The California Tax Credit Allocation Committee and the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee indicate that any administrative costs would be covered by existing fees collected.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we'll move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 959, witnesses in support. What, did you want to make a comment on AB 35? Oh, we haven't gone there yet, right? Okay. Members, we're on AB 959. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
No file.
No file on the item. Members, any comments or questions? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. I think we saw Senator Gallagher is here. Mr. Gallagher, please come forward. You have one item. It does have a due pass recommendation. Members, this is AB 281. Mr. Gallagher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Today, I'm pleased to present AB 281. This bill will amend the state laws that apply to licensed repossessors to enhance the protections of consumers and improve the licensure program. Most significantly, the bill would establish a disciplinary review committee to which a licensed repossessor could voluntarily opt into to contest the assessment of an administrative fine or to appeal the denial of a licensure. The current process to appeal can take more than a year to obtain a final resolution. A disciplinary review committee will save the licensee and the Department of Consumer Affairs time and money so they don't have to go through the more expensive adjudicatory route. This bill is fiscally responsible and has received unanimous support throughout the process. Thank you for hearing this important piece of legislation, and I respectfully request your aye vote.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Chair and members, Jerry Desmond on behalf of the California Association of Licensed Repossessors in support of the bill, and note that we do appreciate the fiscal analysis that shows costs that could be achieved and still have an effective program, and as the payers of the fees that support the program, the licensed repossessors support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Witnesses, additional witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
We're neutral on this bill. DCA estimates that implementing the provisions of this bill would result in additional annual costs of $67,000, including $47,000 to compensate board members and hire one-half staff service analyst to coordinate the committee's activities, and $20,000 of IT-related costs. The Private Security Services Fund can sustain those costs and has approximately an 11-month operating reserve, $9.8 million as of governor's budget.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? There's a motion by Senator Nielsen, but before, let's allow Mr. Gallagher to close.
I just ask for your aye vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Yes, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
The motion is due pass to the Senate floor. Laura?
Aye.
Laura, aye. Bates? Bates, aye. Bell? Hill? Leyva? Mendoza? Mendoza, aye. Nielsen? Nielsen, aye.
Thank you. We'll keep that item open to allow our absent members to add on. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I believe I have one more item on the file. It's AB 517.
Oh, that's on next week's agenda.
Next week? Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, we're going to move right along to Assemblymember Stone's items. We'll have, beginning with AB 43, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
The Department of Finance is opposed to this proposed EITC bill because it's broader in scope and significantly more costly than the one that we just adopted in the budget. It's the EITC is something that the administration is supportive of doing at a state level, but setting up a second program at this time is not something we can support.
Thank you. Comments from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 403, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
The Department of Finance supports this bill because the proposed changes will improve the state's current rate-setting system, including services and programs serving children and families in the continuum of foster care eligible placement settings. We have some revisions to correct technical drafting errors, but we're working with the author's office on that. I can get into some cost specifics if you'd like, but we're in support.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 666, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance. Are you in support or in opposition?
Support.
Oh, please come forward.
Yes, Sean Riggins from Fresno ELC. I'm in support of 666.
Thank you. Witnesses in opposition, finance.
Department of Finance is opposed to this bill for both direct general fund costs and state mandated costs. The Judicial Council estimates costs of $435,000 to $652,000 annually for the workload associated with sending notices to agencies, and also notes that there would be additional one-time costs, pretty minor, to introduce rules of court and create a new form. The bill may create a state mandate with unknown, likely significant general fund costs by requiring local government agencies to seal juvenile records for cases where the court orders those records to be sealed and they don't have fee authority.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 848, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
We don't have a position on this bill. The bill results in estimated costs of approximately $1 million for the Department of Healthcare Services to develop policies and regulation, conduct application reviews and fieldwork, and provide legal support for initial regulatory review and ongoing compliance efforts. It is presumed that ongoing costs would be fully offset by the new licensure fees once the program is implemented. However, under current law, DHCS would need to notify and consult with stakeholders prior to approval of any new fee by the legislature. So initial costs would need an alternative funding source, which would presumably be a general fund loan that would be repaid when the fees are collected. Initial funding needs would need to be addressed through the budget development process because ongoing costs would be supported but not upfront.
Thank you. Comments from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 988, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
The Department of Finance is opposed to this bill. We think it's premature. The Parks Transformation Team is working through a number of initiatives that guide improvements for ensuring that the state park system's long-term sustainability, including making programs and services available to and utilized by a broader group of people. It would be prudent to allow the Transformation Team to develop an overall strategic plan before establishing a new program.
Thank you. Comments from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 1423, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
We don't have a position on this bill, but the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation has indicated that providing administrative hearings in lieu of Superior Court hearings for these cases could result in general fund savings.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 1519 by the Committee on Judiciary. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
No file.
No file. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none. It's AB 1519 by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary. It's okay. We good? Perfect. Without objection, we'll move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Assemblyman Mullins items. Beginning with AB 50, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
The Department of Finance is opposed to this bill because it places significant pressure on the Medi-Cal program to fund a new benefit, which could incur costs in the millions of dollars general fund. Additionally, it results in increased staffing needs to the Department of Healthcare Services to coordinate consultation, meetings, and solicit feedback from stakeholders to develop the plan to ensure home visitation programs are offered to Medi-Cal eligible pregnant and parenting women. The department would likely require 2 positions and $250,000, half of which would be general fund to manage the additional workload.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 477, witnesses in support, witnesses in opposition, finance.
Department of Finance is opposed to this bill because it would create a new election-related mandate. We're not sure what the cost level would be, but modifying certain precinct board requirements and procedures does create new duties for county elections officials. So to the extent they experience costs, they can file a claim.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Welcome, Senator Levine. Shalom. You have several items. You are waiving presentation on AB 761, 900, and 1150, is that correct?
That is correct.
Perfect. You do have 2 due pass recommendations. Let's begin with AB 606.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to keep this brief. AB 606 will increase water efficiency and reduce water consumption by requiring state agencies to adopt drought-tolerant landscaping, recycled water or rainwater capture irrigation, and replace existing irrigation with more efficient methods where feasible and cost-effective. Costs of this bill are minor and may result in future savings and reduced water consumption.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Mr. Chair, members, David Jones on behalf of the City of Sacramento in strong support of this conservation matter. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Richard Harris on behalf of the Water Reuse Association in support of this bill as well.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support.
Mr. Chair, Alfredo Redondo on behalf of the Sonoma County Water Agency in support.
Christian Molina from Sierra Club, California in support.
Great. Any additional witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Finance.
DGS and Caltrans have both indicated that any cost would be minor and absorbable. The Budget Act provided DGS with $15.4 million to continue water efficiency and conservation efforts in their managed buildings.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, Mr. Levine, would you like to close?
I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. There's a motion by Senator Mendoza. Secretary, please call the roll.
The motion is due pass to the Senate floor. Laura?
Aye.
Laura, aye. Bates? Bates, aye. Bell? Bell, aye. Hill? Leyva? Mendoza? Mendoza, aye. Nielsen? Nielsen, aye.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. We'll hold this item open to allow absent members to add on.
Thank you.
Your next item is AB 1295.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to present AB 1295, which creates a new craft distiller's license, allowing small distillers to operate in much the same manner as wineries and breweries. The costs associated with the bill will be offset by a fee associated with the license. Moreover, the Department of Alcohol Beverage Control has indicated that the initial startup costs of the bill are absorbable.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Richard Harris again, this time in representing the California Artisanal Distillers Guild. We're the sponsors of this bill. I think the author hit on the fiscal elements of it. Let me just thank the author and Chairman Gray and Chairman Hall for keeping all of us together and trying to work through all these issues. And I think we've come up with a good bill that's going to raise much revenue and do a lot for tourism in the state. Ask for your aye vote.
I think you forgot to thank somebody. One more person, but it's all right. I won't take it personally.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was looking right at you. You knew how much I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, nice to see
Go
you,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman. Terry Flanagan with the Flanagan Law Firm representing Southern Wine and Spirit Wholesalers Association, and we are in support of the bill.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
Department of Finance is neutral on this bill and agrees that ABC's cost would be minor and absorbable.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, there's a, would you like to close?
I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. There's a motion by Senator Mendoza. Secretary, please call the roll.
The motion is due pass to the Senate floor. Laura?
Aye.
Laura, aye. Bates? Bates, aye. Bell? Bell, aye. Hill? Leyva? Mendoza? Mendoza, aye. Nielsen? Nielsen, aye.
Thank you. We'll keep that item open to allow absent members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.